Good morning and welcome to Intermediate WordPress, Gutenberg for Content Creators. My name is Brian DeConnick and my colleague Jen McFarland is also sitting in. Jen, you want to say hi?
Hey everybody.
So Jen and I are going to go back and forth a little bit on this presentation. If you've never done one of OIT's YouTube Live workshops before, in the description of the video on YouTube, there's a link, a Go link to a Q&A document. So if you click that link, it'll open up a Google Doc. And if you could just, if you have any questions along the way, just type in your questions right there. I do ask that you bear with us a little bit because there's a slight lag in what I say and what gets broadcast. And then there's a slight delay in us reading your question and answering it here. So if we don't answer you right away, I promise we're not ignoring you. It's just the way technology works. So with all that said, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We're going to talk all about Gutenberg and some of the changes that are coming up in WordPress version 5.0. All right, so today's agenda, we're going to start out with the what, why, and when of Gutenberg, basically just sort of center ourselves, what is even happening. We're going to meet the new editor, take a look at it. We're going to tell you a few things to look out for based on the user testing that we've done with some early adopters on campus. We're going to talk about what's going to happen to the content you've already created in WordPress when you upgrade. And we're going to give you a little bit of reassurances. You can do it and give you a chance to actually work with the new editor hands-on and hopefully get a sense for what's coming down to your website. So let's get started. What's the big deal? Why is this happening? What's going on? The what, why, and when of Gutenberg. So this is what's now called the classic visual editor. For a long time, this has just been the WordPress visual editor. Now it's classic. And this is the editor that WordPress has been using for the last 12 years. 12 years is a long time in the web world. And we've all very much gotten used to this editor. We've built lots of tools with this editor in mind. So any changes to this editor are significant. I like the classic editor a lot. I think there's a lot that it does really well, but I also think it's terrible sometimes. So what's great about the classic editor is it's really easy to build simple pages. It's this dependable, reliable piece of software, and sometimes it does a really good job of WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. The classic editor also really lets us down when we're trying to build complex pages, multi-column layouts, and things like that. It feels kind of outdated and clunky compared to some new web technologies. It feels like it was made 12 years ago. And rather than WYSIWYG, we have this whiz and wig dust of experience. I was very proud of that when I typed that out. So that's standing for what you see is not necessarily what you get, depending on several different factors. And to just show you what I mean by all of that, here's a good WYSIWYG experience in the classic editor. On the left-hand side, we have the classic editor with text and an image and some bolded text and a list and some links and a heading. And then when you publish that, that's exactly what it looks like on your published web page. There's a very clear mapping, a very clear relationship of what you put in on the left-hand side and what you got out on the right-hand side in this slide. So that's a good WYSIWYG experience. And this is sort of the classic editor at its best. A bad WYSIWYG experience would be something more like this. So on the right-hand side, we have a more complex page layout. It's nothing super fancy. You see this kind of a web page on university websites and around the web in general all the time. It's got two columns in one spot. It's got these icons. It's got this big gray box at the top that has it has an image on the one side and a little icon and a heading and a little bit of a text on the other side. So this is the sort of thing that we expect to see on different types of websites, but there's not a clear way to do that in the existing classic editor. There's not a button that says, give me this gray box. There's not a button that says, give me things like that. And so we've been looking for ways to get the WordPress classic editor to do what we want it to do for the last decade plus. And we've come up with a lot of different ways, and not we as in our team, but we as in the WordPress community as a whole. Here we have 4 little screenshot snippets of different ways that you might see it on the websites you've worked with. In the top left-hand corner, we have shortcodes. So these little, not quite HTML, not quite real code snippets of words with attributes in square brackets. In the middle, we have a little dialog that says insert post element, and that's something that works with shortcodes. It takes what you type into the little dialog and it generates the shortcode, so you don't have to remember what all the attributes are called. On the right-hand side, we have an advanced custom field module. There are a lot of websites on campus that use these, where rather than having the classic editor that we saw just a moment ago, we have these modules that have a little form in them, and you insert it, and sometimes you can repeat those modules. And then finally, in the bottom left-hand corner, we have the screenshot of a page building plugin. So this is a free page building plugin that's available called Page Builder by Site Origin. We don't have it in a lot of our sites because it is a very not intuitive tool to use, and it doesn't always insert code that we would consider best practices. But this is the sort of thing that lots of websites around the web use, a lot of WordPress websites around the web use, and some sites on campus might be using things like this too. So all of these are different ways we've come up with to try to make the most of the classic WordPress visual editor. And they're all taking an existing product and just trying to shove something new into it, trying to bend WordPress to our will to try to make it do what we want it to do. And it's kind of clunky. It's kind of counterintuitive. Meanwhile, as the WordPress world has been doing this, the rest of the web has been moving in a different direction. So here we have screenshots of 3 different web publishing tools: Medium, Wix, and Squarespace. You may have used those off campus in your personal life, building your own websites or something like that. If you haven't, it's not a bad idea to try them out and get to know them just to see what else is out there and to compare WordPress against. So you'll notice all 3 of these, there's some things that these do that we don't do. So in Medium, for instance, in the top left-hand corner, it's a very clean, white space focused editing environment. And rather than having buttons with text, there are lots of these little icon buttons. In the top right-hand corner, you have a contextual menu. So that menu of options for bold and italics and text size and things like that only appears when text is highlighted. And when that text isn't highlighted, that disappears. And then the bottom example with Squarespace, you have a page editor where you can push a plus button and you get this big menu of all these different things you can insert into the page. And this is all these different, very straightforward and intuitive ways of inserting rich media, complicated, interesting content. So that's the direction that the web has been moving in. And we're not going to use things like that at NC State because they don't really make sense for us to use. WordPress is a much more flexible tool than these other publishing platforms, and we consider it enterprise ready. We can make it do the things that we need it to do on a large scale at a university the size of NC State. New content creating platforms still have something of value. They give content creators a lot more control over what the content is going to look like, and they have this modern and clean user interface that's really appealing and really easy to learn. So the rest of the web has been moving in that direction, and it was time for WordPress to move in that direction too. So this is a quote from Hollenweg, who is the person who wrote the first version of WordPress and is still involved in in setting the direction for what happens next in WordPress. And so last January 2017, he announced that the new main focus of WordPress development would be on creating a new page and post building experience that makes writing rich posts effortless and has blocks to make easy to do all these things that I was just showing you just now. You know, all these different mysterious ways of creating content will now all be standardized into these things called blocks. So over the last year plus, this has been what's been going on in the WordPress development world. And now we're here. The new editor is called Gutenberg. So just for some terminology, WordPress will still be called WordPress. The new editor, the editing experience, will be called Gutenberg. It's not really clear how much you're going to actually see the word Gutenberg in WordPress, or whether it's just sort of a project name that gets bandied about by developers. But you may hear from time to time, we're upgrading to Gutenberg or things like that being said. So Gutenberg will be the new default editor in WordPress version 5.0. And if you don't know, right now, WordPress, the most current version of WordPress is 4.9.4. So 5.0 is coming up pretty fast. We don't know exactly how fast though. So, excuse me. So this past December, Matt Mullenweg gave an update on where Gutenberg is, how far it's come, and when it's going to be released. The update he gave, he said he thought it would be ready by April, and it's not really clear whether ready is the same thing as released and WordPress 5.0 is available for everybody. So we don't know exactly when it's going to happen. We're in this sort of mode of expecting anything might happen sometime in April. It might be pushed back a little bit to be more like May or June, but it's a safe bet that WordPress 5.0 will be coming to a campus near you sometime between April and July of 2018, we think. So with all of that, we also want to give you a quick disclaimer. We're going to show you a lot of new things in the Gutenberg editor, but Gutenberg is an evolving tool. They're releasing a new version or a new update to the test plugin that we're testing against about every 2 weeks. And so some of those changes are very minor changes, you know, a darker line here or a slightly bigger button or things like that. Other times they take user interface control that has been there for the past 3 versions, and they take it away because they're going to try something slightly different. So some of the screenshots and some of what you experience today when you're using the new editor may not be exactly what you get when it goes live on your website. But this should still be a good exercise for you to get a rough sense of what it all means and how thinking about content in WordPress is going to change. So with that, I'm going to let Jen take over as we meet the new editor.
Hi, thanks, Brian. Okay, so the good news for you guys, and what should hopefully keep everybody from running out the door screaming, is that most of WordPress isn't changing. The good news is that when you're logged in and you're looking around, the bulk of what you see and do in WordPress that's not editing content, all the stuff dealing with the appearance of your site, uploading files, changing settings, things like that will not change materially. So you really won't need to worry about that stuff, just the posts and pages. There are some exceptions, of course. Posts and pages are where you add your content. So if you have a theme, or if you're using some plugins that add extra functionality in terms of extra content types, and some of the ones that you're likely to see on campus are the people content type or the publications content types. Those kinds of content types allow you to add extra content, and therefore those will also change and use Gutenberg. Essentially, anything that is allowing you to add content, a large amount of content, is going to be something where that interaction is going to change. So there are a lot of themes and plugins out there that, of course, are going to need to be updated as we go to make this work for them as well. So again, as Brian mentioned that in his disclaimer, your experience may vary. What you see in your environment and how much actually gets changed will depend on the theme that you're using and the plugins that you're using. So this is a quick preview of Gutenberg in its barest sense. To start out, if you have a brand new page, this is more or less what you're looking at. The first block there, This is Gutenberg, is actually the title of the page. And it's pretty much the only thing in your page that is not a quote-unquote block. So again, Gutenberg is using a block methodology to build all the content in the page, but the title is always going to be there. It's the one thing you sort of can't get rid of. Gutenberg's going to start you off with an initial block that's going to be your paragraph block, and it's going to look something like this. We'll talk some more about what you can do with it. Across the top of the page, you'll see that there are some icon-based options for hopefully somewhat intuitive things that you might want to do, like adding a new block or adding a paragraph or aligning your text. And then there's some other options on the right-hand side for publish. I think they've actually changed it. So that little eyeball is actually to preview your page, but I think they may have changed that to actually have that written out. And then there's the settings, and in case you're not aware, those three dots are generally a symbol for menus. So if you hover over those or click on those, you're going to get some extra menu options. You will notice that it's very simple and very minimalistic. And this is the key to the new Gutenberg environment is, they've sort of, they've cut back on the language, right? So it's a very simple, very clean, a lot more white space, similar to some of the screenshots that Brian showed you earlier for Wix and Squarespace and the other tools that are out there. The iconography is nice if you want to keep things clean, but it can be confusing. If you're not aware of what those icons represent, it can throw you off. The icon at the bottom for the plus sign, and you'll notice it's also in the upper left-hand corner, that's the icon for adding a new block. So obviously, as you're building your page, you're going to be adding blocks a lot. That's going to be the thing you do the most. And that plus sign is going to let you, as we'll see, choose which blocks you want to use. Now, I will mention the arrows pointed at that one because Gutenberg is constantly being updated. Brian mentioned they're on sort of a 2-week cycle of updating or releasing the work that they've done in the past 2 weeks about every 2 weeks. And the version 2 versions ago removed that plus sign down at the bottom below the bottom block. So at this point, there are several ways to add blocks, but that little plus sign isn't there right now. So again, in Gutenberg, everything is a block. And as you write, all of the content that you have is going to be put into individual blocks. Now, this is important. Traditionally, you might think of, I have content and maybe there's a couple of paragraphs of content and then I have a heading and then a few more paragraphs. You might think that those multiple paragraphs go into one paragraph block, but they don't. Each paragraph is in its own block, and each paragraph can be edited and formatted separately. And then if you have a list, for example, that's in yet another block. If you have a heading, that's another block. So really it is broken down into the individual blocks very distinctly. So the blocks that are out there, we're going to talk more about how they're separated and what they are. But this is sort of a quick preview as to what we're talking about. So when you go to add a block, they're organized into different tabs, and you're going to be able to select one. And some examples of things are, any kind of content that you would traditionally add. So there's a block for images, for adding videos, for adding a button, and then other more dynamic content. So we're used to widgets being in the sidebar, but they are using that terminology to describe some other blocks that do things like let you show your latest posts or other things like that. And those are new features to WordPress, and they're pretty nifty. So again, the plus button, when you click on that, is going to let you add blocks, and you're going to have a pop-up that looks like this screenshot here, where you can search for a block, or you can select from several tabs what kind of block you want. And again, this plus sign always in the upper left-hand corner, but it may show up in other places. Again, this is something that is changing a little bit. It's a little fluid in terms of Gutenberg development, and this is tricky to teach and to describe, but you may also have the option to add more blocks depending on where your mouse goes and things like that. So you'll see more as you play with it, but it is a little tricky. So each block, once you add it, can be customized and adjusted. The options that you have for customization depend on the block that you're working with. There are basically two types of options, or two places where you can make changes. There's a menu that pops out on the right-hand sidebar where those three dots are. And one of the options in there is advanced settings. And advanced settings is going to open an extra area on the right-hand side of the screen. And it's going to have some quote unquote advanced settings. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those advanced settings are, but I will just mention that it's pretty tricky to have those on the right-hand side. Traditionally, in any WordPress editing, the options that you have for formatting your content are at the top of the block, or at the top of the content editor, right? So that's where your WYSIWYG editor is. If you want to add images, or if you have extra plugins that give you the options for adding shortcodes or tables or other quirky things, that's at the top. So it is a little unusual to have formatting options in the right-hand side. So when you are going to add a block, they're organized into 4 different sections: recent, and then blocks, which has everything basically, except for embeds. Embeds have their own tab, and then saved. Embeds are something, they're a little tricky because they're already supported in WordPress. There is a website, if you do a search for WordPress embeds, that has a full list of all the services that have embed support in WordPress. And essentially what that means is that if you have a link to, for example, a Facebook post or an Instagram post or a YouTube video, all you need to do is drop that URL into your content, and it will render in a way that WordPress has predefined to make it look like a post or like a YouTube video, and work automatically. So you don't have to do all the extra work of adding the video. So embeds are very much supported already. And in fact, if you already have them and you transition, they should work just fine. If you have the link and you put it in a paragraph block, that should automatically understand that it's an embed and support it. However, you can also go to the embeds tab. And if nothing else, this is nice for scrolling through and seeing what WordPress supports in terms of embeds, so that if you do have other things like a Flickr gallery or a Vimeo video instead, you can drop those URLs in with the embeds block. The Save tab, which is the far right tab, is going to be empty by default. So if you choose to look in there, you won't find anything unless you start working with it. The way that you can use the Save tab is to create what are called reusable blocks. And you'll see in the example on the right, there's a very simple paragraph block that just says more stuff and things. It's not even formatted. It just has that little bit of text. But at any time when you're working within a block, you should be able to click on the right-hand menu and see the option to convert to a reusable block. Now, once you have those reusable blocks, they will appear in your saved menu. So when if you choose to save something to a reusable block, it will ask you what you want to name it. And then you can see that there's sort of a preview for it. Reusable blocks appear in that saved tab on any post or page in your site. So it's not just that once you save it, it's available to add to the page that you're currently on again. You could have it show up in any number of pages. It will always show up on that right-hand side. Now, the tricky thing with reusable blocks is that they're not actually editable unless you quote unquote detach it from the reusable block. So there's a few different ways that you can use them. One is that you can format something in a very specific way and have it be generic text and drop it in there as a reusable block, but then detach it and make your editing changes or whatever other customizations that you want, and leave it detached. The other option is that if you have text that you want to have showing up on every page, maybe you have a notification or an alert or something like that, and you want that same text to be in every place, then you could also create a reusable block for that and just drop it in on any page where you want it. You can resave a block after you've changed it. If you resave it as the current block, it will edit all of the existing blocks that use that to change that in the same way. So if you've changed the text, it will change the text on all of that reusable block. or you can resave it as a new reusable block and rename it. So the blocks tab is where you're going to spend most of your time. Recent is, obviously the most recently used blocks, and it's going to, start by dumping commonly used blocks into the recent until you start using things. But blocks is where everything is listed. So in here, there's 4 subsections: common blocks, formatting blocks, layout blocks, and widgets. So I'm going to talk through not everything because there are a lot of blocks in there, but we'll talk through the ones that you may or may not be using a lot of. Blocks that you're going to use constantly are the heading block, the paragraph block, the list block, and the image block. Hopefully these are fairly self-explanatory. Paragraph is going to be the bulk of your text. Ideally, you have some lists to help break up your content. Use your headings and use them wisely. Although Gutenberg is really nice in that it's going to sort of alert you when you're not using heading tags very well. So this is something that we can try and show you in the demo, but there are some improvements with respect to heading organization. And then images will just drop a regular image block in. Some other blocks that are worth your time that you may or may not be using, or that we think are especially cool. So the classic block is basically letting you create a block that's the classic editor. And we will talk more about this because this is sort of part of the transition of your content to Gutenberg. So we'll come back to that. Shortcode is going to let you drop any kind of shortcode in as long as it's supported by a plugin or something else. Whatever shortcode content you have in that block is going to be rendered on your page. And again, this is worth mentioning for people who are using the NC State Shortcodes plugin that we've created, or a number of other shortcode tools. Calendars are oftentimes in shortcodes, so there will be plenty of opportunities to use that block. The button block is going to let you create a button. It's got some basic formatting options like changing the color and choosing where that button's going to go and what text goes on it. So it's not anything that you couldn't have done before, but you would have had to know how to add that code, whereas now it's just a block that you can drag and drop in there and you're good to go. Cover image is a nice perk. So there are still featured images, which hopefully you're familiar with that. Posts and pages can have featured images that can be used to represent a page. And a cover image is different from that. You can put a cover image anywhere on the page that you want. It's generally intended to be a larger image, and it's probably most often going to be used at the top of the page. The nice thing with this is that it will sort of shade your image to be lighter or darker, and you do have control over how much it's shaded. And then you can apply text to that. So this is a common thing that we see people wanting to do, which is have an image and then have some text on it. And then the shading is nice because it helps to make sure that appropriate contrast is used so that your text is legible. Latest posts, I sort of mentioned before, this is a way to drop a block in that will show most recent posts on your site. So that's super cool. There's a few formatting options in there, like do you want to show the date of these and how many of your latest posts, 3 or 5 or whatever. Columns, it says experimental, you can see there in parentheses, and that is an important distinction because while we know that columns are going to be very popular. Brian did talk about this some. If you want to do more advanced layouts, it's difficult to do that in the current environment. And so what columns are intended to do is allow you to build out more of a structure to your site and then to drop other blocks into. So columns would be the only place where you can have quote unquote nested blocks. You could have columns and then you can have an image in one column and text in the other, or something like that. And we're really excited about this. However, it's still, as it says, experimental. It's a little bit buggy. Gutenberg developers are trying to put some caveats in there, like you can't nest a bunch of blocks within each other because that's going to get sticky. So that's still being developed. And then the gallery is one of my favorite things about the improvement to the look and feel of Gutenberg, which is that you can drop images in, choose how many columns you want, and you could always do that with WordPress before. However, this really is an improvement in terms of styling for the gallery. So it's going to resize your images automatically to fit the number of columns that you've selected. And we'll demo this later, but it's nice. All right, blocks worth getting. Gutenberg and WordPress has elected to put some blocks in here that we think are kind of silly. I don't know that all of them will stay, but even if they do, we want you to be, or even if they don't, we want you to be on the lookout for these so that you're kind of aware of what they mean. So subhead is actually a newer one. And the intent of this is to have some text that's styled to go below a heading to sort of describe some of what is in the paragraph below that. This is something that doesn't get used a lot on campus. And from our perspective, we are concerned that subheading will be used inappropriately. Subhead does not have any H tags associated with it. So this is not, you sort of need to be aware that that's not going to put this content into kind of any heading architecture, so to speak. So you want to use it sparingly. The video block, when we did user testing, one of the biggest points of confusion for our users was we wanted them to add a YouTube video and they kept trying to do it with video. Video will only allow you to add a video that's hosted by your WordPress site. So when you go to add a video block, it's going to be looking for you to upload or select from your media library a video. You can, if you have, for example, a lot of our users had a link to YouTube, and if you try and drop that in there, all it's going to do is display the URL. This does not automatically understand that you're trying to add YouTube from an external source, and this is an embed. So video, we do not advocate that our users upload videos or host videos in WordPress. Most of the time we tell people they should be using Vimeo or YouTube. And so for us, video just doesn't really have a purpose. So it's one that we definitely say you should probably overlook. Quote and pull quote, obviously pretty similar. There are some vague distinctions between them. They can be styled differently. I think one is intended to be used as a citation and one is intended to be used as more of an actual quote, and it's a little tricky to distinguish between them. So, I would say pick one or the other for your environment and then let it go. Code, this is how you know that this is being built by developers, is because they have a block that is designed to just format and display code. And that is to say, show code to the world, not to have it render. So this is something that 99% of our users will never use and can safely ignore. And then verse is a really quirky thing where WordPress is giving you a place to add text independent of some of the styling and layout around it. So you control where there are line breaks and things like that in there. It's intended to be for lyrics or for poetry or things like that. But again, not something that really comes up on campus that often. So again, we sort of talked about this before. All blocks have a couple of options available to them. One is the options in their block menu on the far right-hand side, and this screenshot sort of illustrates some of those options. Traditionally, the top section is some things like advanced settings, which we'll talk about in a minute. If you want to edit your content as HTML or remove your block or duplicate it or convert it to reusable. And then the options below there are sort of similar to what you're doing. So you inserted a paragraph block. Did you mean to insert a heading block or a list block? Do you want us to change this and format it in a different way? And again, the menu options here are going to change based on the block you're using. And then there's the advanced settings, which again, I talked about before, but here's sort of a good example of what they look like. And on the right-hand side, you can see it says document and then also block up at the top. There are two tabs in that right-hand column. The default is document, so you may not even actually see the advanced options for the block you're in unless you click on the block tab. So that's another thing that you should be aware of. And then, of course, the options in this block tab depend on the block that you're using. So some of the examples, the previous one was for paragraph, and there were a bunch of useful things in there, like you can have a drop cap and you can change colors of the background and things like that. This is the example of the settings for adding an image. And so here you can see that you have the options. WordPress is like, did you mean to insert a gallery? Probably not. And then you can choose to upload your image or select your image from your media library. Your advanced options in this case on the right-hand side are very slim indeed. The only option that you have in this case is to add an additional CSS class, something that probably most of you are never going to worry about because you don't have those. For the most part, in general, every block is going to have at least one advanced setting on the right-hand side. However, in a lot of cases, that only advanced setting will be to add an additional CSS class if you want. And here's another example. So this is the read more block. So you can choose to, if you're familiar with this, it's already an option in WordPress where if you have some content but you want to direct people, this is traditionally used in posts. If you want to show a little bit of content but then direct people to read the full post in a separate place, you can add a read more link. And some of the options here are things like, you can't really edit it or anything like that, but you can choose the advanced options are things like, hide the teaser. So what does it look like when people insert the read more? How much do they get to see? Things like that.
So I'm going to take over from Jen now and talk about some things that we discovered when we did some user testing, because this is all a very different experience. And Jen is writing in the Q&A document right now, just to remind you that if you do have questions, that's where you should head to ask them. A lot of this is new and confusing, at least that's how we felt. And so we're always here and definitely here to answer questions. So what for? The good news is blocks make it a lot easier to do complex page layouts and build dynamic content. But it is very different from what we're used to, very different from what we've been doing in WordPress for the last 12 years. And so with that in mind, to try to prepare us for whatever support tickets might be coming in when we switch to Gutenberg and things like that, we started conducting user testing in late 2018 or late January 2018, mostly with power users who already knew WordPress, a few people who were less familiar with WordPress, but still had a pretty decent foundation in content management systems in general, and things like that. We gave them a 30-minute exercise to learn more about the new editor and to create content. And if you want to read all about it, I wrote, probably longer than it needed to be, a blog post all about everything that we did at go to ncsu.edu/Gutenberg testing results. Don't read that right now because I'm going to talk more, but that's something you can check out later if you'd like. So in those 30-minute content exercises with some of the users that we were testing, a few things came forward as potential trouble spots. The first thing is that no one knows what to call anything or where anything is. So one of the actual quotes from this testing, one of our users, he said, "So I clicked on the little mini hamburger options thing looking over here." So he was not sure what to call something. The best thing he could come up with is mini hamburger options. And that was what he called the 3-dot menu that appears right next on the right-hand side next to each block. Honestly, I'm not quite sure what to call that either, except the 3-dot button or the block options menu or something like that. So many people are familiar with the 3 lines stacked on top of each other and that being called hamburger menu. You see that in the brand bar at the top of NC State web pages with the more button, things like that. But there are a lot of people who are still a little confused by that menu. Those 3 lines aren't necessarily evocative of this is something you can click to open up to see more. And condensing those 3 lines into 3 dots is taking away, taking what is already not a super intuitive icon and making it maybe a little less intuitive. So the three dots there, nobody really knows what to call it, and no one really knows where to find things. So this is something that sort of people get the hang of after a little while, but it's something to keep in mind. There's going to be a little bit of a learning curve. So the next thing is that it's not always clear when to choose which block to use. So Jen mentioned this earlier, the video block and the YouTube embed block do different things, and putting a YouTube URL in the video block isn't going to render a YouTube video. The advanced block settings are another thing that people had trouble with. Basically, nobody that we tested found the advanced block settings without a hint from us. And that's sort of something Jen talked about too, is we're not used to looking for content formatting options over on the right-hand side. Content formatting is something that we usually think of as coming out of the toolbar across the top of the editor or something like that. The right-hand side is where we look when we're ready to publish. The right-hand side is where we look when we're adding a category or where we're changing some sort of metadata about the post or the page, like page parent or page template or things like that. And in general, the users that we tested really had trouble with this idea, not only that there were these advanced settings on the right-hand side, but that those settings are different when different blocks are selected. The fact that things change depending on the context of what you're doing is something that's very new in WordPress and is something that's going to trip people up. Again, one issue, when do you need a new type of block and when can you just customize the block that you have? This comes out of number one, all the different types of blocks and not knowing what they do. And number two, all the different options for customizing blocks. In some sense, WordPress maybe has given us too much power to do things, and this is going to lead to a little bit of confusion. So here I have an example of two paragraph blocks. They are the same type of block, but using all of the block options, all of the ways of editing and customizing the block, we can make them look very. In our user testing, we gave people something that looks similar to the bottom block, with the gray background and the red text, and asked them to try to create this, to try to recreate it in Gutenberg. And a lot of people didn't go looking for the paragraph block. They went looking for something that was more evocative of a gray box that they could put text into. So sometimes you have options that will let you customize. Sometimes you're going to need a new type of block, and that's something that's going to take some time to learn. Excuse me. Another thing that tripped people up is the difference between formatting changes that only impact selected text and formatting changes that impact an entire block. So on the left-hand side here, we've selected some text, and that text is going to be formatted by the options across the top in the formatting bar. So if you want to make that text bold, then if you highlight that text and click the bold B button, that text will be made bold. If you want to change the font size of a paragraph, you have that option to change the font size in the right-hand sidebar in the advanced block settings. But that font size change is going to impact the entire block. It's not something that is only going to impact the selected text. So in general, selected text can be edited using the formatting bar across the top, but the whole block is going to be edited or reformatted using the advanced settings in the right-hand sidebar. So the two things that we really want people to remember as they're exploring Gutenberg, as they're getting to know Gutenberg, number one, don't forget to look at the advanced settings on the right. You have lots of options there. You have lots of things you can do there that are very powerful. And then number two, sometimes you should just try a different block. A little bit of trial and error, a little bit of experimentation isn't a bad thing. And as you get to know Gutenberg a little bit better, you'll have a better intuition about what different things do. So now you're probably wondering what's going to happen when I upgrade. I'm guessing most people who are attending this session probably already have a website that they're working on, probably already have a lot of content, and maybe are starting to worry that they're going to have to redo everything from scratch. And that's not what's going to happen. But there is going to be an update or an upgrade process that's going to have to take place when we go to WordPress 5.0. So in there's sort of two ways that Gutenberg can be turned on right now. The first way is what's available today, which is the Gutenberg plugin. So any website can sort of get a sneak preview of what Gutenberg is going to be looking like by enabling the Gutenberg plugin. And you see what that looks like up above in the screenshot at the top of the slide. You have your list of pages, and when you hover over a page title, you'll have the option to either edit, which will open up Gutenberg as the editor, or you can choose the classic editor, and that will open up the classic editor that we're familiar with. So the Gutenberg plugin is a way to get a sneak peek without necessarily committing yourself 100% using Gutenberg all the time. After WordPress 5.0 launches, Gutenberg will be the default for all content unless you have another plugin that will re-enable the classic editor. And you'll have some options for doing that for whether or not you still want Gutenberg to be optional, whether you want it to just be hidden completely, but that's something that your site administrator will need to decide. If you are the site administrator, I recommend that you check out our Intermediate WordPress Gutenberg for Site Administrators workshop. If you're not the site administrator, these are some things that you can start talking with your site admin about. When will Gutenberg be turned on? What comes next? And whether or not the classic editor needs to be available after WordPress 5.0 is launched. So with your sort of normal WordPress content that you've put into the into the classic editor, when you upgrade to Gutenberg, all of that content that you've put into the page is going to be dumped into a classic editor block. So this is a block that Jen mentioned. It is, rather than having paragraph blocks and list blocks and image blocks, is taking all of that content that you created in classic WordPress in the classic editor and is putting it into a block that reproduces the options that are available in the current classic editor. So all of your content is in one editable region, and it will remain in this format until or unless you need to make significant changes to the text. So with the text in this classic block, you can still go in and you can still edit the text, change from regular to bold or something like that. But what you can't do is you can't button and a new button block and insert it between two paragraphs or something like that. If you'd like to do that, then you're going to need to convert your classic editor block into separate blocks in the new Gutenberg world. And you have that option under this right-hand 3-button drop-down menu. So classic editor blocks have this option here, convert to blocks. And if you click on that, then Gutenberg will take everything that it sees in that classic block and try to match it as best it can to blocks that it knows about. So your paragraphs will become paragraph blocks, your bulleted lists will become list blocks, and so on. And so here we see an example of that happening. At the very top, we have a paragraph, and that paragraph becomes a paragraph block. We have 3 bullet points, and that becomes a bulleted list block, and so on. And then down in the left-hand side on the left, down at the bottom of the left-hand side, we have this embed that was sort of a non-standard embed. It's coming from My Media Site at NC State. And since My Media Site is an application that's maintained at NC State, WordPress doesn't quite know what to do with that. It doesn't have an embed block ready to go. And so it takes the code that was used to put that embed in, and it puts that into a custom HTML block. And so here you have something that might be a little confusing. You're losing your preview. You're losing the little indicator of what this is. But now you have a block that you can move around and manipulate in the new Gutenberg world. I'll mention now that our team and a couple of other groups on campus have recently started working on a collection of NC State blocks that will look at things like my media site or other NC State specific content and try to make them Gutenberg friendly. Those aren't quite ready yet, but that's the sort of thing that's going to be coming hopefully in the next few months. So this transition of converting a classic block to separate blocks by clicking the convert to blocks option, like I said, that's something that you have the option of doing when you're ready to make more substantial content changes. It's the sort of thing you'll need to do if you really want to take full advantage of all of the options that are available in the new WordPress editor. But it's not something that you have to do in order for your website to work. So when the switch gets flipped, there we go, and Gutenberg gets turned to your site with WordPress 5.0, the end users seeing the public site who don't log into WordPress, they shouldn't see any change. Nothing is really going to be different about your website. All the action is going to be happening behind the scenes when you're editing content. So sometimes Gutenberg might see something that it doesn't really know what to do with. That might happen if you yourself edit the HTML, or if the code that you have, excuse me, the code that you have in the classic editor is something that's very non-standard or unusual. Then Gutenberg will detect that error. It'll say what to do with this, and it will offer you a few options for how to potentially fix it. The first option, overwrite, is Gutenberg is going to try to match what you have as best as it can to a block that it knows about. Sometimes that might be the right option because you'll be able to get sort of close enough and be able to adjust what you have in that block as you need to. Sometimes when you click overwrite, you might lose a little bit of content. A couple of things might get swept up and removed when Gutenberg is making that update. You have the convert to classic option, which will again take whatever Gutenberg doesn't understand and put it into a classic editor block with sort of the assumption that it must have worked in the old editor. So hopefully it'll continue to work if we put it in an old editor block. And then you have edit as HTML block. And this is Gutenberg saying, I really don't know what to do with this. I'm going to put it in an HTML block and trust that you know how to edit your code to make it work. So what this looks like for your website is really going to depend on what your website looks like now. What kinds of tools or plugins you've been using on your existing website to edit or change the WordPress editing experience. So I'm going to walk through each of these four, just a very quick outline of what updating might look like. For vanilla WordPress, it should be a pretty smooth upgrade. By vanilla WordPress, I mean there's not a lot of plugins that are doing interesting things, changing the content experience or anything like that. You're just sort of using WordPress out of the box. If you do have some old plugins, they may break, but generally speaking, everything should be pretty smooth. And you'll have to work through that process we just went through a moment ago of converting from the classic editor block into new blocks. If you use shortcake-powered shortcodes, so if you don't know what that means, on some websites you might see a little button above the classic editor that says Add Post Element. That's something that you'll see if your website is using the NC State Shortcodes plugin that our team built, and maybe sometimes other things. Generally speaking, it's going to be people who work with our team for their web needs. And what Shortcake does is it takes shortcodes, those little bracket code snippets, and converts them into a nice rendered preview like you see here in the screenshot. Button and call out that are displayed nicely in the existing classic editor. If that's what you have your content, if that's what your content looks like in your existing site, then the same thing is going to happen as what we saw in the vanilla WordPress scenario. Everything is going to be dumped into the classic editor block. Some of the code previews are not going to look quite as nice, but generally speaking, everything will still work the way you expect it to work. And then if you do decide to convert that classic block into new Gutenberg blocks, all of those shortcodes that have been previewed will be rendered in the shortcode block, which means you'll lose the preview, but everything will still work. So here we have that callout block and that button block that have now been broken into their own separate shortcode blocks, and you can see all the shortcode attributes, the square brackets, things like that, that went into making them. If you have a site that uses advanced custom fields, so that might be something that was built by University Communications or sometimes an off-campus vendor, and then a bunch of other developers on campus have used ACF for different purposes. In sort of the most extreme version, the classic editor has been removed entirely, and you just have these advanced custom field blocks or modules on your editor page. In less extreme versions, you have the classic editor and these blocks underneath. But generally speaking, you'll see something that looks kind of like this. You'll have a box with somewhere where you can put in text or select an image, and then you'll have this option underneath this button that says add row or something like that to choose different modules to include. And if that's what you have, the good news is that all of those custom fields will continue to work and continue to be there on the editor in Gutenberg. The bad news is, depending on how your theme is written, those will continue to render, but the blocks that you can insert using the new Gutenberg editor may not render on your website. And so this isn't so much an issue of your website's going to break, it's more of an issue of when you're editing a page, it's going to be a little bit confusing. So up at the top, you might have this plus button, you might have blocks that you can put in and manipulate and things like that, but they don't really do anything depending on how your theme has been written. And so this is something, again, a place where you need to have a conversation with your site administrator or with the developers who built your website to make sure that whatever changes that need to be made to the theme can be made to your theme, and you can sort of bring your advanced custom fields into alignment with the new Gutenberg world. It's not something where it will break, but it is something where it will look different, and in order to move forward with future WordPress updates, something needs to change in order to make everything play nice together. So just to reiterate what I said, at the front end, what your users see won't break, but the editor will be more confusing. Some themes may need to be completely rewritten or at least have some significant changes, and your experience will really depend on how ACF is used. And so these are conversation points for when you're talking with your site administrator or your developer to try to make sure that they're thinking about how advanced custom fields that they have in your current theme are going to work with your with the new Gutenberg editor. The next situation is people who are using page building plugins or page building themes like Divi or Visual Composer or things like that. And our best answer for that is we don't really know what's going to happen. It'll get turned on and then we'll just see. And that's not a super satisfying answer. But basically the issue is there are so many of these page building things out there. A lot of the time you might be using them if your website was built by an off-campus vendor or something like that. there's not really a practical way for our team to test all of these possibilities. Excuse me. So the best thing you can do is, number one, find people who built your page building plugin or theme, and find out what their plan is. Hopefully they've got that published on their website already. If they haven't, find that contact link and send them an email. If they have a plan, you want to make sure that you have an up-to-date license with them. If you bought your license 5 years ago and it expired 4 years ago, now's probably a good time to re-up with them and make sure you update to the latest version of their plugin when Gutenberg comes. If they don't have a plan, and there are some of these page building plugins that have sort of been abandoned, or where the developers just are sort of going head in the sand, we don't want to think about it, now's a good time to look for other options. And then, so our team, we hold office hours every week, and we'll talk about that a little later. If you're not sure what to do, if you're not sure what comes next, if the page builder plugin doesn't have a plan, we can talk you through your options and help you get down the right path. So now you've got some homework when you leave here today. Number one, find out what your site uses. We've given you some examples that you can refer back to of what Shortcake-powered shortcodes, advanced custom fields, and a page building plugin might look like. And contact your support team, whatever support team you need to contact, and talk to them about what the next steps are for your website. So we've been trying to get the word out about Gutenberg on campus. We're holding these workshops and things like that for both content creators and site administrators. And just a couple of weeks ago, we held a big all-day event with WordPress developers on campus to talk about what Gutenberg means for us and how our practices need to change. Excuse me. But this is a big change that a lot of people haven't been paying attention to and might not be aware of. And so if your site administrator responds to your questions with, huh? I don't know what you're talking about. This is a good chance to ask them to contact OIT, ask them to do a Google search for Gutenberg or Gutenberg at NC State, and that will bring them to a lot of resources that will help them start making the right decisions. And then, as I mentioned, we do have Friday morning office hours for anything and everything WordPress. So if you have any questions about Gutenberg or you need advice to figure out what comes next, you can find out where our office hours will be at design.oit.ncsu.edu/office hours. So now we're going to get a chance to actually use Gutenberg a little bit. We have two things right here to choose from: a public sandbox, which does not require any login, and any changes that you make will not be saved, and then a campus test environment where you can spend a little more time getting used to the editor and create your own site, save your changes, and really have a chance to dig deep and experience the new Gutenberg editor. For the sake of this workshop right now, I'm going to ask you all to use the top link, oitdesign.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg-quick. But you should definitely hold on to oitdesign.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg to go back later and get to know the editor a little bit more. But if you could all go ahead right now and go to oitdesign.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg/quick, that should open up a sort of a demo Gutenberg editor that you can interact with and use without saving any changes and without needing to log in. We have a couple of examples of some Gutenberg content that we're going to run you through and ask you to try to recreate. So I'm going to assume everybody is at that URL. If you're having any trouble, if you could just post something in the Q&A document, that would be very helpful. But otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and move on. So let's see what we can do with the new editor. The first thing I'd like to ask you to do is to try to create something that looks like this. And I will let you look at this for a few minutes and puzzle over it, and then I'll go ahead and do it myself. So I'm going to go ahead and open up, oops, that's not what I meant to do. I'm going to go ahead and open up the Gutenberg editor. So this is what you should have seen when you went to Gutenberg/quick. As we mentioned earlier, here is the title. This is the only, not a block. It's just the title at the top of the page. And then we scroll down and we have a big image, which is a block. You'll notice the alignment options for the image right here. So I've got it set to full width, but I can pop that down to just wide width, or align center, which keeps it inside the container for the text. I kind of like it full width though, so I'll put it back. Here we have a paragraph text where the text of the paragraph is a little bit bigger, and you'll see that I did that by going over to the block settings, the advanced settings right here, and I changed the text size to 24. I can go ahead and reset that, and now it's a smaller size, or I can use the slider to select the font size that I want, or actually select a numerical value right there. Excuse me. You also have the option here for changing the background color. So I'll go ahead and choose this gray color, and that should help you get started with what I was asking you to do a moment ago. In this example right here, down here we have this gray box with text and a drop cap. So the gray box I've just shown you, and I'll go ahead and do a different gray. That's a lighter gray. And drop cap option is right up here, and I turn that on, and now I have the large T at the beginning of this paragraph. Some of the other things that we asked you to try to create, we want you to have a image off to the right-hand side next to a paragraph of text. So I'll go ahead and scroll down to a paragraph of text right here. And I'm going to hit enter at the end of this paragraph to open a new block. And in this new block, it's blank, so by default, it's a paragraph block, but I can choose instead to insert a different block. So I'll go ahead and click on Add Block right here. I'll choose an image block. And from my media library, I'll select this image of the scoreboard at Reynolds Coliseum. So I'll select, and by default, it's this big full width image. I would like it to be right aligned. And so now it's this right aligned image floated to the right-hand side in context with the text, which is very similar to what we saw over here with the example Jen made of the stormtrooper stuck in the teapot. My images are not quite as fun as Jen's. So you'll also notice that this block has this image block has a couple of things associated with it. You can insert a caption right down here, and the caption itself has some simple formatting options associated with it. I can click on the image, and it has these 4 dots, these blue dots in each corner, and that will let me drag and resize how big the image is going to be. So I can make it smaller or I can make it larger. This is a lot easier than what you can do in sort of current classic WordPress. It's a nice little feature for resizing right there in context, seeing how the text around it moves. We also have, so in this example that we have here, we have text in a paragraph, and then we have a set of bullet points, a bulleted list. And if you haven't tried creating one already, you can do that by hitting enter at the end of an existing paragraph, or by clicking on the add block button right here and selecting a list block. And that list block gets inserted right here. In this demo, we already have the bullet points replaced by the NC State style red chevrons. So I'll go ahead and start typing. This is my first item. This is my second item. It works much the way you'd expect it to work from using something like Google Docs or WordPress, the classic editor. If you have a new bullet item and you press tab, oops. Okay, well, that didn't do quite what I thought it would do, which is a little embarrassing, but Gutenberg is changing, as we've said. So pressing tab will jump you to another block. I didn't expect that. But if you're on this last bulleted item and you push this indent list item option right here, that will pop you over to be an indented sub item underneath this top or this second bulleted list item. So here's a sub item. So as you play with bulleted lists and images and things like that, I'm going to move on to the next thing we'd like you to try to create. And if I'm going too fast, please do say something in the Q&A document. I really can't tell if you're having trouble or not. So just let me know if you need me to spend more time on something. So the next thing we'd like you to try to create is a gallery. So Jen mentioned this before. She really likes the gallery functionality in Gutenberg, and I agree. It's this really lovely implementation of photo galleries. So here what Jen has is a gallery with 5 images. The first 4 are in 4 columns, and then the 5th image is full size across the bottom. And that's a lot of choices, it seems like, to make, but excuse me, Gutenberg will help you make some of those choices. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a moment. So I'll go ahead and create a new block right here again by going to the plus button and going to blocks. And gallery is one of my common blocks. I'll just mention we have these other block categories that we saw before. I'll go back up to my gallery. We have somebody writing in the Q&A document that they love the Star Wars pictures. That's all Jen. She's our Stormtrooper fan. So I'll select my gallery block. And I already have some images in the media library. So I'll click Add from Media Library. And we've got a couple of duplicated images here, but that's okay. For this, I'll go ahead and pick a tally image, a Reynolds scoreboard, the strolling professor, and the bell tower at night lit up red. So I've selected my images right here, and I click Create a New Gallery. If you created galleries in WordPress before, you can drag and drop to change the order. So I'll go ahead and move the bell tower to the front and move tally to the end, like so. and you can click down here and set whatever caption you'd like to set for that image. So I've selected my images. If I decide I don't want one of them, I can click this X button to remove it, but I do want all 4 of these. And I will go ahead and insert my gallery. So now Gutenberg has arranged them into this, this gallery grid right here. And if I click out of it, it will reformat so that the last image takes up 3 columns, each of these taking up 1 of the 3 columns. So you'll notice that just by default, it's a 3-column layout. We can change that. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. We can change that right here. If you click on the block again, under your gallery settings over on the right-hand side, excuse me, under your gallery settings on the right-hand side, you can drag this little selector to change it to 2 columns, or change it to 4 columns. It will only let you choose as many columns as make sense for the images that you have, 1 column being the minimum. So I have 2 columns right here, and they're arranged into this nice 2x2 grid. I kind of liked my 3-column layout though, with you'll notice it only expands the last photo to be the full width after you're sure you're done inserting images. So right here, this plus button is an option to insert a new image. And this would let you upload it from your computer rather than selecting from the image from the media library. You can also edit the gallery if you want to change the order or change something else about the gallery. This little edit gallery pencil option right here. And this will let you select more images. So I'll go ahead and select this Gutenberg image 2 and create a gallery and insert it. And now we have 3 columns, and then the 2 remaining images are resized to fill the remaining space with 2 columns. If I, just to demonstrate, if I go in here and I bump this up to a 4-column layout, then the first 4 images are put in 4 columns, and then the last image expands to take up the remaining space. You'll notice that some of these have captions. Those were captions that were already loaded into WordPress, but I can remove them by just selecting and deleting. Or with this last image, I can go ahead and add a caption. Oops. So you'll notice sometimes if you click in the wrong spot, it'll create a new block right here. This little darker line right here between blocks is a selector that will let you create a new block. So I can, if I click on this image right here, I can write a caption like so. So I'm assuming that you've all tried the gallery block, hopefully had a little success creating a gallery. I'm going to go ahead and move us on to the next thing we'd like you to try to create, which is a more advanced layout here. So we've got this text overlaid on top of an image. We've got a set of recent posts that have been published. And then we've got this heading right here and a YouTube video. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. This top block right here, we've got an image with text over top. If you were paying close attention in Jen's, when Jen was running through some of the different available, you might remember that there's a block that does that called the cover image block. So here I have already an example of a cover image block. I've got the NC State bell tower with text over top and aligned to the right. And you'll see that text alignment option is in the right-hand side and also at the top right here. Changing it in one place changes it in both places. This is one of those confusing points where we told you that the options toolbar act differently than the options in the right-hand sidebar. Sometimes they might show up in both places. Sometimes a developer might misuse them or put them in the wrong place, things like that. It's still a good rule of thumb that what happens in the top toolbar affects selected text, and what happens in the right sidebar affects the entire block. But sometimes that doesn't quite happen. It's still true that if you select text right here and choose this top toolbar, which is a little confusing that it's different than this top toolbar over here, this top toolbar will still make it bold text. So let's try adding a new cover image block. So I mentioned before this little dark line that appears underneath the block. If you click it, when your mouse is hovering over it, that will let you add a new block. As before, it starts out as a paragraph block. I can use this little plus button to change that to something else. And I want an image block. This looks very much the same as a regular image or a gallery. I have the option to upload an image or to select from the media library. I'll go ahead and select from the media library. And this time, excuse me, this time I'm going to go with my image of Tally Student Union. So I'll select. And you'll notice it's got this little toolbar right here for the text, indicating that this is an area where I can type. So I'll go ahead and type Tally. So I have this text overlaid on top of the image. I can align it to the right or to the left. I kind of like it in the center. I can take and make it either a left aligned image, a right aligned image, a centered image, or like we had up above, a wide width or a full width image. I'll go with wide width. Not quite as wide as the bell tower example, but still wider than the regular text content right down here. And then Jen also mentioned you have the option of changing the background dimness. So that's over in the right-hand sidebar. I can, so by default, it's at 50%. I can bring that all the way down to nothing. So this is the raw image without any dimness, any shading over top. But you'll notice that it's a lot harder to read the white text Tally against the white clouds of the sky. It's always a good reminder that just because you can read it, if you can, it doesn't mean that all users can read it. You want to be aware of all the different abilities that people come to your website with, and make sure that you are not accidentally excluding anybody. And so here we want to make sure that we have a darker background just to ensure that the text is legible. You can slide it back to 50%, which is where it started. You can go all the way up to 100% if you want, but if you're doing that, there's not really a point of having a cover image. Somewhere in the middle is a better place for it to go. Generally speaking, 50% is probably going to get you into a good place against just about any image. We also had, let's see, we had a list of recent posts that had been published. So let's go ahead and add a new block right here. And the recent posts are under blocks. And then if we scroll all the way to the bottom, under widgets, we have latest posts. So I'll select that. This test site only has one post published, this post that we're working on right now, Meet Gutenberg, the new WordPress editor. But you have a couple of different options for how it can display. First is list view, which is the default. You can also have it display in a grid view. If we had more posts, you would have a 3 or a 5 across column. or sorry, I'm sorry, a 3 cross column. And you know it's a 3 cross column because over here in the right-hand side, we have this column selector. So now it's a 4 column and so on, and I can bring it back down to 3. So we have a question about showing an example of using additional CSS. So that's sort of a tricky thing to show. If your WordPress theme that you're using has CSS classes built into it, or if you have used the customizer to add your own custom CSS, then you can add in a CSS class right here. So an example might be if I have a custom CSS class that's built in for gray background on some sort of an element, and the name of that class is gray background. I would type that in like that, and then when I save the page and it renders on the front end, then this block right here that I've applied the CSS class to, the whatever that styling is, adding the gray background that's built into the theme, would then display or would then be rendered that way with the gray background for the user-facing published version of this page. What it wouldn't do, I don't believe, is change what it looks like in the editor. So this is one of those things where if you know the theme that you're using has certain classes built in, then you can use that, but it's not something that's it's not something that you can sort of experiment and discover. Oh, if I type in a class here, I can see it how it renders in the editor. It's one of those things where either your site administrator or your developer who built the theme would need to have built this into your theme, and you know that it's an available option. So of all of the things that Gutenberg comes with, I feel like additional CSS class is sort of the most anticlimactic. With your latest posts block, you have a variety of options that are pretty self-explanatory. The number of items you want to include, the category that you want to include, how you want to sort your posts. Since there's only one example post in the quick editor that we have right here, there's not a lot to look at, but that have actual content, there's a lot more that you can do with that block. And then I'll just show off 2 more blocks in the last couple of minutes that we have, a heading block and a YouTube embed block. So the heading block, here's an example of a heading that we have. It has the option to change to different types of blocks, and then you have the different levels of heading, an H2, an H3, and H4. Over on the right-hand side, you'll see we also have an H5 and an H6 option. So I'll remind you that headings, in addition to changing what the text looks like, headings also add page. So for users with assistive technology, like a user with a visual impairment who's using a screen reader or something like that, those headings are going to give them information about the different sections on the page if they want to skip to a later section or something like that. The screen reader software will be able to pick out which headings are available and tell them the whole page is called this. Each section underneath the title is called this. Under this section, there are subsections called these, and you have the option of jumping to them. So that kind of structure is important, and it also just makes your content a lot more readable. And you can see what that looks like, what that kind of structure looks like. Up at the top in this toolbar, you have this little circle with an eye, and that has a little, when you hover over it, that says content structure. And if you click on that button, you'll see some information about your page or post that you're creating, how many paragraphs, how many blocks, how many words, things like that. And then you also have your document outline. So just as I was describing a screen reader might use, you have your title, and if you click, it'll skip you straight to that title. then you have your next section and the subsections beneath that section. So I turned my types of blocks into an H3 here, but if I skip, or if I bump it down to an H4, then I'll go back to the content structure and you'll see that types of blocks is now an H4, and it is a sub-subsection underneath the H3 advanced settings. That doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. So you want to, for the content that's on this example page, so you want to be thinking about this document outline just like an outlining exercise in high school English class or something like that, where each time it indents in with a new subsection, that's sort of a subtopic within the larger section. And I'll also show you should not skip more than, or you should not jump by more than one heading level. So an H2 is followed by either another H2 at the same level or an H3 as a sub-level. And if I don't do that, if I take an H2 and follow it by an H5, I'll take this H3 right here and turn it to an H5, then Gutenberg will tell you this isn't quite right. This H5 here doesn't seem like it's the right heading level, and it will alert you with this little yellow highlight on the H5 indicator and tell you it's an incorrect heading level. And I didn't show this a little earlier, but I think it's worth showing. I'm going to go ahead and add a button. Okay, so I have a button that goes to the NC State homepage, and I can choose different colors to go with this button. And if I choose a background color like light UNC blue, you'll notice that the white text color here is hard to read. It's not very legible. And Gutenberg will tell you this color combination may be hard for people to read. And it will encourage you to either choose a different text color or a different background color. And so if I put a dark gray text against this light blue background, that's much easier to read. And so Gutenberg takes that indicator away. Now, why somebody building an NC State website would ever want to build a UNC blue button, that's a poor choice that you shouldn't do. And on that note, there are a few tools that are available that we're starting to roll out to campus that should give you the background and text color options for all of these blocks as just NC State brand colors. So we don't have that in this example right now, but that's the sort of thing that we're starting to roll out as we start moving more and more sites to Gutenberg. So with all of that, I really do encourage you to spend more time. Let's see. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. There we go. Just reminding myself how to use. So I encourage you to spend more time getting to know Gutenberg, but in these last couple of minutes, we're a little bit over time. I'd like to show you a few resources and help options. There's the WordPress Gutenberg Handbook, which has information about Gutenberg and developer resources. If you talk to your site administrator or developer, sure what's going on. There's the actual Gutenberg plugin if you'd like to give it a try yourself on your website, and you can work with your site administrator to install that plugin. We have information that we've compiled about Gutenberg and that we're continuing to add to on our website. And there's actually a Go link for that now, go.nccu.edu/Gutenberg. And then anything and everything that we do is also available at our website, design.oit.nccu.edu. It sounds like Jen might want to add something.
Nope, just hanging out in case anybody has questions.
All right. And then just as a heads up, at the end of April is a sort of a 2-day WordPress mini conference called WordCamp Raleigh. If you are a WordPress enthusiast and you want to learn more, if you you're interested in Gutenberg and you want to hear more from other people in the area who are starting to do interesting things with Gutenberg, things like that, there's going to be more information about this mini conference at 2018.raleigh.wordcamp.org. WordCamp generally has 3 tracks for beginners, power users, and developers. I know Jen and I will be there, especially for the developer track, but if you want to sit in on the beginner or the power user track and see some of the interesting things people are doing with WordPress, that's a great opportunity. It's a Saturday, Sunday, so it's not during regular work hours, and there is like a $35 registration fee, but there's a lot of good information, and it's always a very good event. So thank you very much for your attention, and we really do appreciate any feedback you can give us. We'll be sharing out in a follow-up email a link to these slides and just a reminder of who we are and what you learned here today about Gutenberg. If now is a good time, please go ahead and go to go.nccu.edu/wpeval and give us some feedback on how we did. The YouTube live thing is always a little bit weird. As we're talking, we can't really tell whether you're happy or angry. So whatever feedback you can give us, we really appreciate. So we're going to hang out here for a few minutes if you have any questions you want to add to the Q&A document. But otherwise, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Yeah, so question, will this YouTube link continue to exist even after the live broadcast is over so you can rewatch? The answer is yes, and I probably should have mentioned that at the beginning instead of at the end. So this link will continue to exist. You can come back as often as you'd like. All right. Well, I see 11:40 on my clock here. Um, hopefully, if you have any questions, you have already asked them. um, if you do have any other questions, if something occurs to you as soon as I stop this broadcast, you can email the help desk, help@ncsu.edu, or you can reach out to our group directly, OIT Design, all one word, at ncsu.edu. And then we do hold office hours every Friday from 9 a.m. to noon. This week, that'll be in the Avent Ferry Technology Complex, room 106, which is downstairs. So feel free to stop by, ask us any questions if there's anything that was confusing, or if there's anything you need us to go over again or something like that. And besides that, we're always happy to answer questions via email or anything else. So with that, rather than just keep talking and embarrassing myself, I'm going to go ahead and stop the broadcast. Thank you, everybody.